Hello and welcome to Prepare Your Financial Services Organization for GDPR. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or your computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change that selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in the control panel. Also from the control panel, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If we're not able to get to one of your questions, we plan on responding to each of those personally through email. The deck will be available through SlideShare, along with a recording of the webinar 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of the presentation. Please keep an eye out for that email. My name is Ryan Peterson. I am the Global Technology Segment Leader for Data and Analytics for Amazon Web Services. I'll be the host and moderator for today's webinar. Today you're going to hear from me about what Amazon Web Services is doing, especially as related to GDPR and privacy. You'll also hear from Dr. Anand Singh, Enterprise Architect from Data Guides. The agenda for today is to get an overview of big data, data lakes, and analytics for financial services related to AWS, and to hear from Data Guides about how to automate GDPR compliance. And then we'll have a nice, hopefully lively Q&A discussion. Like I said before, please make sure you get those questions added to the questions list. Today's learning objectives is we're going to address data privacy and compliance regulations, including GDPR and CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Using a single solution to discover sensitive personal data across all of your repositories, including S3. We'll talk about masking, encryption, pseudonymization of data across financial services organizations, and scaling the process of discovery management and protection, even as your data scales. So I'll get started. Data lakes on Amazon. So we've been talking for the last 10 or so years about this idea of taking all of the data from your organization and coalescing it inside of this concept we call a data lake. It could be a big data platform, a Hadoop platform. In our particular case, we've standardized on S3 as the repository for collapsing and getting all of that data into a single location. We can use all sorts of different tools to get the data in, whether that's an ETL provider or something more interesting like getting Kinesis to pull streaming content and land it using Firehose. We have the ability to get data from on-prem systems, even large capacity content by using things like Snowmobile. And then once that content is in S3, we have the ability to surface the information through various means, whether that's through Amazon EMR to take a lot of the unstructured data and to process it in large capacities, Amazon Redshift, where you can prepare and curate content for repeatable use, or even some of the more direct access systems like Amazon Athena or Redshift Spectrum that allows you to connect to the data in S3 directly. We've been doing this for a long time, but with great data repositories being built, we really wanted to start focusing our energy on spending the time and making sure everyone's comfortable with the idea of how to reduce risk through removing PII from those data lake architectures. Now, the benefits of AWS for secure data storage are immense. Just to handle a few of them, durability, availability, and scalability. We have 11 nines of durability. We cross multiple different areas within a region. And we have multiple regions that you can actually replicate across as well. We manage a long list of security and compliance regimes that I'll show you a little bit later. That includes the most recent updates with GDPR and ensuring compliance with all GDPR requirements. As far as the ability to access data in a very fast way, we've added something called S3 Select. S3 Select loads the primitives of the data underlying so that you don't have to access all of the content in order to find an answer. To give you an example of that, maybe you have a terabyte file that has a small piece of data and you want to pull that data out. You can go query against that content and get just a gigabyte of that 1 terabyte file by using S3 Select. And of course, using analytics and other ML processes over that data lake are also really fantastic. From a flexible management perspective, the ability to see where data is coming from, where it's going to, the consumption, the costs, and all of the security policies that you might have over your data, including some automated life cycling, tiering, getting data from, for example, S3 into a less expensive tier, such as Glacier, all of that in a single management infrastructure is really nice and easy to have. At least that's what our customers tell us. One of the most valuable things that customers tell me when I meet with them is this graphic represents when we have a certain amount of data or a certain amount of performance requirements, sometimes both. It often means on an on-prem environment, we would have to scale up an individual server to meet that demand. And then once the demand tapers off, we end up having to run all these servers that we're no longer needing the full capacity of. In a Amazon Web Services environment, we can keep that elastic. So as you need capacity, we can elastically grow and shrink the environment, and even do that in an automated fashion. So you're not having to sit up at night and wait for your demand to go down to reduce your capacities. And that makes it a very nice way to handle the costs of the environment to be directly correlated with the needs of the environment. As well, we look at things like Amazon EMR when you're needing to scale up and run a lot of unstructured content through a processing engine. You can save a lot of costs by running what we call EC2 spot instances. These are instances that run as extra capacity. This is the excess capacity that AWS might have at any given time. And so you can bid on that capacity to get what you need done for the lowest possible price point. All of this in mind, we maintain something called a shared responsibility model. And that means that AWS is going to be responsible for the security of the cloud. We're going to make sure that all of the things, all of the requirements, whether it comes to compliancy and security, are all taken care of from respect to compute, storage, database offerings that we have, networking offerings we have, as well as all the physical infrastructure within our data centers in the availability zones, physical infrastructure within the regions, and any edge locations. We rely on our customers and sometimes the partners with the customers to look at securing and taking care of everything that's put onto the cloud. So anything within the cloud, such as client-side data encryption or the operating systems that you may install, are things that we expect the customer to share responsibility in taking care of and managing their security. Now, this is maybe the most important slide to me, and yet it's a very basic concept, but there's a lot of dark data now that we've asked people to put data into data lakes, and many of our customers have said, let's do that, and they start adding more and more content. But that dark data is getting larger and less accessible, and one of the challenges we've seen is that as more and more data gets in, the permissions of that data has become lesser and lesser as you start to worry about risk of things like personal information leaking out to your analysts. So how do we handle that personal information to a point where that dark data becomes more easily accessible, more available to other organizations, and do that in a really automated way? And so that's what I'm really looking forward to spending some time with Dr. Singh on. Financial institutions have uniqueness, and we understand that, and we look into that, which we try to help in understanding so that we can help our customers with what makes the most sense. Now, obviously, the expansion into things like GDPR, the CCPA, having to do with FSA and all the ICOs, various payment processing systems, and frankly, whatever kind of financial services organization you come from may have to deal with different regulatory concerns and sometimes even conflicting ones. And so one of our goals is to try to get to the root cause of all of these issues. And to me, that root cause really is that personal information piece. When you get to that consumer privacy element, if you can start to figure out a way to reduce that, it's going to help quite a lot. Now, it's a global industry. Things are changing often and quickly. In various countries like the UK and Australia, we're seeing things like open banking become a staple and a standard. Really this idea that data needs to freely flow between consumers and banks. Even data ownership questions come into light, and being able to manage privacy in those spaces is becoming even more important. So the dangers of holding personal information, these are a few that I've thrown on a slide that I know about. I know that you look at the front page of the news, you see one of these almost every week, and oftentimes you can deal with some of these issues. So for example, external hacking requests coming in, so an external third party might try to hack. Well, good perimeter security might stop some of that. What I find is one of the major issues in trying to deal with those rogue agents. rogue agents is something that's really, really hard to protect against. If you use rogue agents as the one metronome for which to write your policies against, I think you'll be much more secure than simply looking at it from an external hacking attempt. Now, AWS complies with a whole bunch of different compliance regimes. I think this is really helpful for financial services organizations in particular. You might have requirements to make sure that you retain, whether it's ICO or various financial services regulatory requirements. We have requirements for healthcare as well, like HIPAA. We have requirements for federal, and we have to maintain the same compliances across all of our servers to make sure that you're getting not just your own security regime, but all of them combined. And of course, like I said earlier, we're taking care of ensuring that our systems are compliant with GDPR, CCPA, Canadian requirements, PCI DSS, and many, many more. And every time something new comes up, we sit and talk about it with the regulators to ensure that we understand what's required. So giving you that background and my desire to remove personal information from as many organizations as we can to try to reduce risk, I'd like to hand it off to Dr. Singh to talk about what DataGuys does and how it works. It's a really fantastic software.
Awesome. So first of all, thanks, Ryan, for adding doctor in front of my name all those times. I'll pay you that 50 that I promised next time we meet up.
I'm looking forward to it.
In all seriousness, that was great insights into how AWS is helping all kinds of organizations, obviously including financial services, to adopt such a robust platform with tons of great services and at such a low cost. Now, today, I want to focus on some of the privacy-related work that we at DataGuys are doing with many of these organizations. Actually, financial services is the biggest vertical in our group of customers, and 30 minutes is definitely not enough to describe everything we do with them. But what we really want to do is promote data privacy and how to become good stewards of consumer data, which is actually our corporate directive here at DataGuys. So even if you don't buy our software after this presentation, please do contact me or anyone at DataGuys, as we'd love to exchange information and ideas and talk about privacy. We deal with the largest financial services in the world, and we deal with stuff that typically does not surface to the public knowledge. And in our journey to solve these problems, we always learn new and interesting things. And at the end of the day, I want you to be successful at this. And in one way or another, I will do my best in contributing to tackle this beast of a problem. So DataGuys has been in business for over 11 years now and offers the most comprehensive solution for GDPR compliance. Actually, even prior to GDPR, DataGuys is helping organizations with PCI, PII, HIPAA, and just a lot more customer-specific compliance and privacy needs. Our founders were actually Oracle consultants, and as part of their jobs, they had access to all this consumer data. Now, they were good stewards, right? So they obviously played by the rules and made sure it was not exposed or leaked in any way. But it was extremely troubling for them to know that losing consumer information, not just to outsiders, like Ryan mentioned, the hacks and all the other stuff, but to insiders also was extremely easy. And that's why they founded DataGuys. Now, there's a lot of legislation that's come up, but they have been very successful, our founders and everyone here at DataGuys, at amassing all this knowledge and creating technology to help us safeguard the privacy of our data. This is why we're in the market lead today. We were actually GDPR before GDPR was even born. I was actually reading a report by Forrester that came out just before GDPR came into effect, and it said that less than a third of the companies are GDPR ready. And once the GDPR is in effect, they would need to revise a lot of the work that they've done. So although I don't have any current stats on what the state of affairs is today, but it is for a fact that as time goes on, people are convinced more and more that they are prepared even less than they imagined it to be. And there are some real good reasons for this. The fundamental reason is that this is an incredibly hard problem to solve. There's an insane amount of complexity in the technology landscape of a typical organization. You have Hadoop, you have relational databases, you have cloud stores like S3, you have data warehouses, you have file shares, and you have all these applications that house a tremendous amount of data. And some of this data is very business critical and resides on systems that are hypersensitive when it comes to their resource utilization. Also, the very definition of what it entails to be compliant is different. Mind you, I didn't say it can be different. It is different from organization to organization. So be it PCI, GDPR, CCPA, or any one of those names that Ryan showed in one of the slides with all the regulations earlier, the regulations define generic do's and don'ts. But when these guidelines trickle down to executable policies, they're always different in how, where, and when they're applied. This is why you need a solution that can work easily with all platforms and show results and reports on a single dashboard and can scale to multiple different geographic locations of data and repositories. So today, our largest customer has close to 100 petabytes of data, and this number probably before my next webinar is going to go up. So now, before I go any further, I want to quickly go over the 5 basic capabilities of the Data Guys solution, which we call DG Secure. These modules are all in one solution, and they can work either together with one another or independently just on their own. The first one is the big feather in our cap. That's the sensitive data detection module. And Data Guys scans and reports the exact quantities and locations of all the sensitive data by actually scanning the data itself. Now, we may use metadata in figuring out what context a particular data element might be in, and this enables a very accurate determination of the sensitivity of the data. But it is imperative to note that one of the fundamental differentiations is that the data is actually being scanned. So, we built a lot of intelligence into this detection process. It is not just a mere regex match. It's a combination of multiple techniques that come together, just like pattern matches. You have contextual analysis. You have validations that could be logical or mathematical. And then there's all these other heuristics that work together. Now, moreover, there's machine learning that's built into the product that can help with complex and specifically ambiguous data types. Think about addresses or 9-digit numbers that can be social security numbers or ABA routing numbers or just simply noise. Now, once you find where all your sensitive data resides, you have to remediate that. And that is our next capability, the protection part of it. So protection of data can be done by masking, which is a one-way transformation of data, or encryption or tokenization, which are both obviously reversible. So for analytics, dev test, and BI kind of environments, masking is usually the preferred way to go, while to protect the production data, it is encryption or tokenization, as you do need the real data to run your applications or business. And in financial services today, we have customers that do either one of these or both. DG Secure actually offers more than 40 different ways of partially or completely masking the data. And if that doesn't cover the masking requirements, then there are custom functions that can be easily built. The masking process is especially great for analytics, as it preserves full referential integrity and statistical accuracy of the data. So one of our customers actually uses masking for fraud detection. This is a really large financial institution. So the use case there was that they were not allowed to share credit card numbers with the fraud detection guys. So what our product does is it takes every credit card number and just changes the middle 6 digits. So that means that it's able to preserve the first 6 and the last 4 digits, and that is good enough for the fraud detection algorithms to do their job. Right? So moving on to the next feature, that's monitoring. Now, this is another very unique capability that we have. So typically, monitoring solutions work at the network level. They would tell you that a user tried to log into a database 5 times and failed. Now, what we do is go way beyond just events and actually see how the sensitive data is being accessed and by who. So by using machine learning, we're able to profile behaviors of users and see if the ongoing activity is normal or anomalous. Think about a marketing user who opens a file that contains social security numbers, or an HR person that's looking at a database with credit card numbers, or simply think about a user who's running select queries on PCI data Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And now one day runs a large query on a database that has PCI and say PII data. Even if for some reason that is an authorized event, the anomaly of it definitely requires some audit. Or maybe it's an external user who spoofed an identity or hacked someone's account. So this is how data guys can help with breach detection. And especially, like I mentioned earlier, breaches by insiders, which is one of the hardest problems to solve. Finally, the last 2 features I want to talk about is the right of access and right to erasure, which are definitely more GDPR inspired. Now, this was a big paradigm shift that GDPR brought into the mainstream regulation. And from a technical perspective, this is one of the hardest things to do, if not the hardest one. Under GDPR, as a consumer, we now have the right to demand an organization to tell us exactly what data they have on us. And if we want, they have to delete that information. So one of the financial services that I have personally been working with for the last couple of years told us that on the first day of GDPR coming into effect, they received 3,000 such requests. So there are a lot of things that go into getting this done efficiently. So for example, what we do is we leverage our detection capability to make sure we're indexing the data better, more comprehensively and more efficiently. And then doing all of that in structured and unstructured data to pinpoint exactly where that particular user's record is. Now, before I move forward, I want to highlight a couple of other differentiators. Firstly, data guys can work with a wide variety of platforms. So be it in Hadoop like EMR and AWS, or MapR, Cloudera, or Hortonworks, any of your standard relational databases, any data warehouse, and then file shares. That could be Windows, Linux, or Solaris based. And obviously, object stores like S3. Moreover, we can work with all of these platforms, both on premises and in the cloud. Now, another big advantage of the software is that it can work with data of all shapes, sizes, and structures. So this means that could be structured, semi-structured, or just unstructured free-form text. And this could be in text files, CSV, Microsoft Excel, PowerPoints, Words. It could be your Avros, Parquet, Sequence, RC, ORC, XML, JSON, EDI, and all your standard and some even non-standard and custom file types. So being in such disparate sources and at such large financial institutions, you can imagine a tremendous scale at which we implement the software with real customers. The architecture of the product is highly scalable, and we can work with not just large amounts of data, but also a large amount of platforms. So for example, one of our customers, they have thousands of file servers, and obviously the amount of data on each of these file servers is really high. And then, we're installed at some of the largest Hadoop distributions in the world, with thousands and thousands of nodes in the Hadoop cluster. And even the largest database environment that we've scanned so far has had 30 petabytes of data. So the big thing about privacy in general is whatever nuances each regulations may have, like the long list again that Ryan showed earlier, it usually boils down to four fundamental pillars: technological and process-based pillars that need to be adhered to at the very least. But whenever anyone embarks on this journey of compliance, there are a lot of unknowns. You simply don't know what you don't know. However, this is where we come in. We have the expertise, and having worked with so many financial services organizations, one thing that we've realized is that the only thing constant in this equation is change. It could be GDPR today, the CCPA tomorrow. Brazil just announced its data privacy law called LGPD. India, Thailand, and a whole bunch of other countries are now either creating new laws or revamping the old ones. So we've been working with all the top consulting organizations actually who take on big compliance and privacy initiatives at organizations of all sizes and verticals. And the very first thing that they need to do is find and catalog all the sensitive data. Even these consulting organizations who would typically like to spend a lot of hours doing this manually have now realized that what they want to do is achieve a lot more at a holistic level. And that is not doable just by throwing bodies at this. So they would rather leverage an automated solution like DG Secure to get these powerful results and then work on remediations or breach protections or implementing the subject rights. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit of a technical use case description here, and I specifically want to describe how we deal with mostly structured and unstructured data to begin with. So let's start with structured and semi-structured data, right? We often come across DBAs who say, hey, we know exactly where everything is, but in reality, it's not an easy task to accomplish because with large databases that are being used at a really high frequency with such a wide variety of operations, it becomes really complex on how you keep track of what's happening where. Another thing is that a lot of organizations are still doing this manually or with some in-house scripts. And both of these are not reliable or scalable. At one of the largest software companies in the world, actually, we were invited to showcase a faster masking solution. But upon insisting, the DBA who eventually let us run detection, we found that the result was very, very surprising. We found 185 rogue databases, and they all had almost 100,000 emails and social security numbers. What had happened was one of the developers had made a copy of certain tables and then forgot to delete the original tables, and now they were just hanging around. So we see these kinds of examples all the time. Now, a lot of the organizations, what they would do is they just rely on column headers to gauge the sensitivity of the databases. But even if that was fully accurate, how do you prove that to an auditor? And when you come across description columns, how exactly do you determine what is contained in those cells? So this is where, since we're actually scanning the data itself, are able to give you insights into the sensitivity of each column. Imagine a field with a million 9-digit numbers and a column header that says XYZ or just numbers. It is not possible to figure out exactly what is represented by that column without doing some intelligent analysis. So even if you do that scan and out of this million 9-digit numbers, let's say 300,000 of them are SSNs, 300,000 of them are ABA routing numbers, 300,000 of them are noise, and the rest 100K are nulls, then you have to look for context, maybe in the header, but if that doesn't make sense in other columns, you have to do all of that to give it a semantic definition that you can take as an auditor or a privacy professional and then do something with that column. Similarly, with description columns, there can be multiple sensitive types in each cell, and they might have to be handled differently based on their data types. Now, once the sensitive data has been found, it can be remediated. So here you can see an example where the data has been masked. Again, the masking can be done consistently. Like in this example, if you see the name Vito Corleone was changed to LeBron James. Now, if the consistency option is checked in our product, so DJ Secure will make sure that all occurrences of Vito Corleone are changed to LeBron James. And this consistency can be maintained across all databases and even unstructured data repositories. Now, I don't want to minimize the structured data problem, but the unstructured data poses a relatively hard challenge. And this is because some of the data in these repositories can be extremely dirty and may have little or no context at all. And almost every customer we have in financial services has this as one of the biggest pain points, especially if you have a call center. This is where data guys and AWS can help you by working together. AWS has a service called Transcribe that allows for high quality voice to text conversion. So now the use case that I want to talk about is that every time you call a bank or an insurance company or a travel company or your internet service provider or your utilities company, you hear this automated message that says your call will be recorded for quality assurance, right? Now, what this means is that your entire conversation is being recorded and will be subjected to analytics so that this organization can serve us better with its product and services. And that's great. I personally highly encourage that because that's the right way to improve our lives. But the caveat is that as we're talking on the phone, we're giving a lot of personal information, which is actually being stored by these organizations in voice or text. So the consequences of this can be devastating if you don't account for the personal data that is being stored, right? Either you're losing this sensitive data during a breach, or there's an audit, and the auditors, who are really smart people, they know what the hot areas in organization are. They go there and find these vulnerabilities. So one of the financial institutions that I was working with earlier this year, they were storing all this voice to text data in S3. So when I first ran detection, I found names and a lot of 9 and 10 digit numbers that were transcribed as words. And along with these numbers, there was context. So for example, you can see social or SSN indicates that 9-digit number is in fact an SSN. So obviously these results blew their minds and the InfoSec guys. And today we are in production protecting around 15 petabytes of data in their environment, most of which is in AWS. And again, just like the previous example, once you find that name, which was sensitive, Jonathan Franklin, in my last slide, it was flagged as red, right? It was personally identifying information. It is in the best interest of that organization to turn it into something green, like green that is safe, highly useful, very dependable, like Aaron Rodgers. Yes, pun intended there. So although I've mentioned quite a few customer examples already, there's a particular use case that I want to go into a little bit of detail. Now, because of some legal restrictions, I can't really reveal the exact name of this customer, but they are a very popular financial services organization. In fact, they're one of the world's largest organizations in this vertical. So a couple of years ago, they made a strategic decision to fully adopt the cloud. And obviously, AWS emerged as their top choice. Now, in fact, as soon as the year 2020, they want to be completely operational in AWS. Now, the problem in all of this came due to security, privacy, and compliance, as they mandated that no PII data, especially the social security numbers, and no PCI data, specifically the credit card numbers, will be moving into an off-premises location. Now, this is due to some legal guidance that they had, but its consequence was a major resistance in their migration and compliance efforts. So working with this customer, we came up with this elegant solution to solve this problem. The idea was to do a sensitive data scan on premises. They had a wide variety of platforms, but all of their databases and Hadoop was supported by data guys out of the box. Now, the result of the scan would yield two possibilities. Either the file or the table would contain sensitive data or it would not contain sensitive data. In case there's no sensitive data, the process is straightforward. You move this file into S3. In case there was some sensitive data, then a remediation process kicked in to cleanse this file or table. And after the cleansing was done, it was moved into S3. Now, once it gets there, we scan the file once again just to make sure that there was no sensitive data that got leaked during the migration process. And as this is an ongoing process, there's another problem that emerged that we had to solve. It was the new data that was coming straight from an application into S3. And again, this is subjected to a scan and then appropriate remediation. And once this data in S3 is cleansed, it was made available for consumption to all these various applications and services in AWS. A few more technical details on this. Each new file that was moving into S3, it happened at intervals of 3 seconds. Now, we had Lambda functions that were running in AWS that would detect exactly when and where this file would land. And this Lambda function would trigger the DG Secure API to run the detection job on it. So at this rate, we were actually able to process almost 14,000 files a day. And to date, we've gone into petabytes of data that's moved around. And they've got a compliant environment. So this is my last slide. If you're snoozing or if you walked away from your computers, I think you should come back for the grand finale, because there's a couple of things I want you to take away from this. And I know that you were bought off on AWS with its scalability and low cost. And this has worked great for all the organizations as they're able to ingest and analyze more and more data. But if you remember Ryan's description of the shared security model, the responsibility of the data is on you, right? This is the most secure infrastructure that you'll find for your data. But again, like Ryan mentioned, there are tons of ways for the sensitive data to leak. So in order to be compliant and stay resistant to breaches, while you drive the most value out of AWS, you have to do this in an automated fashion. The scale of this is so massive and the processes are so dynamic that throwing bodies at this is just not an option. So there are many companies in financial services that have realized this. And some of them, they tried building their own solutions using their army of engineers. But they soon realized that this is not their core competency. And building something that has to service so many platforms and it has to keep up with all these changing versions of these platforms is definitely not easy or cheap. And most of all, the auditors, like I mentioned, they're smart people. They know some of these key areas that we've talked about, and they go ahead and target those. So what my request is to allow us to help you. And in doing so, you're actually helping me and everyone else, because a lot of the work that you guys are doing, listening in today, it's directly or indirectly interacting with my personal information. And as good data stewards, we have to collectively develop and implement technology and privacy guidelines to safeguard the crown jewels of our digital identity. With that, that's all from me. Thank you, and back to you, Ryan.
So, Zaksham, this is amazing. I really appreciate all of the process and design work on Data Guys. I think a lot of the people have been asking some questions really related to more of the compliance and GDPR side of things. So I'd love to jump in on a couple of those questions right away. By the way, this is my favorite part. So for the attendees on the call, please get your questions in. There's a huge opportunity to learn anything you want to know about, whether it's GDPR or CCPA, or what Data Guys does, or even what Data Guys doesn't do, but we know about from results of working together on projects between Data Guys and AWS. So with that in mind, let's get started. So Stephanie's asked the question, regarding the right to erasure, must the records be deleted, or can you just remove the individual's identifying information?
So that's a good question, because what we like to do is, like I mentioned this, the interpretation of GDPR is very different from organization to organization and legal department to legal department. With our solution, you have the technology in which you have complete control on what you want to do and how you want to do it. Now, if you want to target the whole record, go ahead, do that. If you want to target specific pieces of information, do that. So, in short, I'd say you tell us what your legal requirement is, and we'll fine tune our product to serve that requirement.
Perfect. Brian asked a question. When you're dealing with a customer who may be a European citizen or maybe a California citizen, how do you differentiate in your software between those two?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know we were talking about this a few days back, that it's really hard. In fact, it's near impossible to make those distinctions. Especially when you are ingesting petabytes of data in all these different kinds of sources. You really have to take a holistic approach, right? It's very, I would say it's cheating if you say, hey, here's this set of users that I want to make sure I'm complying for, and here's this other set of users that are outside the realm of that regulation, right? So whatever approach you take, you have to go after your repositories and your data holistically and just treat everyone the same way you would from a privacy point of view.
That makes sense. So you're basically saying that if you're going to treat one person one way, you have to basically treat everyone the same way, because it's nearly impossible to know if someone's actually a European citizen or falls under a certain compliance regime. Which I agree with. I think it's a very, very difficult thing to solve. So you sort of have to just look at everyone with the same compliancy lens.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Ryan, you've seen all these regulations, and you've seen that there's a core set of guidelines that are sort of common in between all these different regulations. Once you tackle those, there's very little nuances here and there when it comes to, say, Brazil's privacy law versus California's versus GDPR. So just go after everyone.
Perfect. David just asked a good question. I actually love this question because it's very timely. He says, is California looking to be the first domino to fall with other states enacting afterwards? I may actually start with that, and if you can add on. Just this morning, there was a Senate hearing on this issue, and a lot of the conversation in that Senate hearing, as I listened in, was the question of whether or not there should be a federal statute that sort of overrides the states, because if you have 50 different privacy policies to deal with, it gets even more complicated, and likely, like we just said, you'd have to kind of have everybody dealing with the same lowest common denominator. Whoever comes up with the least or the worst, depending on what you look at it, policy means that everyone has to be looked at the same way. So the feds were just literally asking Amazon as one of the companies, as well as Google and others, whether or not there should be a federal statute for privacy, or if they should leave it up to the states to individually create one. I'd love to get feedback from various attendees. If you want to email me after, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. What's your thoughts, Dr. Singh?
Oh, absolutely. One thing that I've sort of realized recently is that GDPR is very contagious. We went into, talking about PCI and PII for a lot of years to suddenly everyone talking about GDPR. And like I mentioned, every country is doing something or the other to catch up to GDPR, quote unquote. And I think we're probably at a federal level not too far away from getting there. So yeah, totally in line with what you said.
So another question is this easy to get up, or is this one of those pieces of software that would take, days of planning and testing and validation before we can get using it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is because of time restrictions. I wasn't really able to talk about deployment. So I'm great this question came up. The deployment of this product is extremely simple. Now, I know you hear a lot of people say that, but I'll share some common examples. I was doing a proof of concept at one of the banks out of the East Coast. I want to say this year in April, and once the infrastructure was provisioned and all security items were taken care of, we were able to install, configure, and get the product up and running in about 20 minutes. So typically, our installation is that easy, and you can install the product literally on any Windows or Linux machine. So you could obviously, do it in AWS, or, like I was mentioning the customer use case earlier, you can deploy the product on premises and then scan or remediate whatever you have to do. Once the product is up and running, like I said, in about 20 minutes, it then depends upon the sizing and volume of your data. Typically, again, referencing to the same customer that I was talking about earlier, we were able to scan about 4.5 terabytes of data in 6 hours in 2 different platforms, and that was a great win for us. And I'm working with our marketing and business development department to make sure they become publicly referenceable very soon. But it was a great proof of concept because the 6-7 hours that I spent with them, we found some credit card numbers in their test environment and one of their sandboxed environment that they were going to use for some hackathons or something, right? And so while we were doing our final proof of concept wrap up, the chief data officer says, "Hey, let's talk about data, guys, in a couple of minutes. I see credit card numbers. They're not supposed to be there. That's a violation. Let's first talk about what we can do to remediate that." And so after that, you can imagine just, us working with them was just very natural. And that's something that happens all the time. Another healthcare company out of the Midwest, we were just in the proof of concept, we were scanning a data warehouse and we came across a column with some telephone numbers in them. The DBA says, "Hey, that is a false positive. There's supposed to be no telephone numbers here." And he said, "Look at this list of column headers. Nothing indicates the presence of telephone numbers." So, obviously, I'm trying to make a case for us. So I say, "Hey, can we just query that database?" And, it turns out there were a lot of telephone numbers and they were not in a standard format. That's why they had missed it. But, our policy was able to actually interrogate all different kinds of telephone numbers. So we were able to catch that. So there's so many examples of what we've done. And all of this is done in literally the first 30 to 45 minutes of us, just installing the product.
That's great. So Anthony just asked a question I thought was really interesting is, how do you ensure that what you're removing is actually a telephone number and not just a 10-digit number?
Yeah, and this, I alluded to some of the intelligence that's built into the product. Basically, a 10-digit number is not a telephone number all the time, right? So what we're doing is we're leveraging all the secret sauce, quote unquote secret sauce that we have into our product. But we have a bunch of these heuristics that are, like I said, looking at patterns. There's some validations that we're doing. There's some checks, on different kinds of things. Like for credit card number, it's the credit card issuer's numbers. And then it's context. And, sometimes it's very normal for us to be scanning data that actually has very little to no context. So then we have to be a little bit more creative with what we do. We, like I mentioned, leverage machine learning in certain cases. But once we make that determination, what that element actually is, only then we go ahead and mask or delete that data. And as a guarantee, what you could do is you could run detection on top of that again. And if you've deleted that data properly, that result would not show up. In general, though, if I was stuck in a situation where there was a 10-digit number just lying by itself, you know, I would probably classify it to be sensitive, because given a choice between a false positive and a false negative, we definitely, you know, incline more towards the false positive side, because sometimes it's okay to classify something incorrectly, but to altogether miss it, that's very, very detrimental. Another thing I want to add here is that, having said that, sometimes elements by themselves, they really are not that sensitive. So as part of my dissertation, where, you know, I looked at a lot of anonymization and de-identification and re-identification techniques, some things by themselves are not privacy revealing, right? So Latanya Sweeney, a very, very popular researcher and a professor, what she did was she analyzed the US Census data from 2001, I think. And what she figured out that date of birth, zip codes, and gender together allow you about 87% chance of identifying anybody in the United States, right? Now, the gender by itself may not be privacy revealing, right? But a gender, a date of birth, and then zip code, like I said, but a gender, a date of birth, and the city or the county you're from, I think the city also allows for a 53% chance of re-identification. And in fact, going a step further, the gender, the date of birth, and the county you're from still allows for an 18% chance of re-identification, right? So when we look at your data, we can actually tell you with some statistical probability that, hey, what is the likelihood that a particular element, even if it has no context, can be detrimental to you, right? So one of our financial customers actually told us, hey, if you find credit card numbers by themselves, don't flag them to be sensitive, because a credit card number by itself, even if it gets leaked, what can a hacker really do with it? However, a credit card number in the vicinity of a 3-digit number, that is a CVV, and a zip code, now, you know, we're concerned. So find groups of these elements together and then go after them. So I know I kind of derailed a lot, but I just wanted to say that it goes a lot more than just saying, hey, here's a 10-digit number. It could be a telephone number, right? So we'll help you with all of this context.
Yeah. So an associated question to this is, we've got somebody asking, I have to do segmentation of my data, and if I remove access to all the PII, such as address, how do I still do that segmentation? Does your product allow for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you know, we maintain all referential integrity once we're pseudonymizing the data. And even if you're not deleting the information and substituting it with fake values, we can make sure that it's consistent. So like I talked about earlier, so joins and subsetting and all those things are possible.
Perfect. I think we're getting up to the top of the hour. I want to give people time to get back to their to the next meetings. I wanted to just remind people to please fill out the satisfaction survey you get after the webinar. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you, Dr. Anand, for being here to answer all these questions. And please join our future webinars. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.